Good evening, everybody. Hi, Anita. Hi, Saman. Okay. So, welcome to day, is it 10 or 12 or something, of Saman and I reading 1001 Arabian Nights. I tried to get a princess outfit a little bit on for you guys again tonight. And let us see where we were exactly. So we are now on the 9th night of 1001 Arabian Nights. And if you remember, yesterday and the day before was very beautiful. Actually, I really liked the story of the last 2 days. It was about a merchant who'd had an issue with a genie who had then given him these 4 magic fish, and the merchant brought the 4 magic fish to the Sultan, and the Sultan wanted to find out why they were magic and went off on a big long journey to seek the magicness, whatever the right English word for that is, of these 4 fish, and discovered this young prince in a palace who'd been bewitched by his wife, who was also his cousin. You know, in those days, those things were okay. Who, guess what? And if any of you, especially Anita, have been listening to this from the beginning, guess what she was doing? Behind his back, she was secretly sleeping with her slave. Now, I am not joking. There seems to be a repetitive theme in this book so far, that many of the women many of the wives, the queens, and consorts and whoever else end up sleeping with the African slave. So let it be a warning to you, this is not a good thing to sleep with your slave. It's gonna go pear-shaped, I promise you. So this is what happens, and he discovers this, and he goes to find out what his wife has been up to. He secretly follows her one night and discovers her with said slave, and wounds the slave, upon which his wife casts a spell on him and makes half of his body into stone. And then, long story short, the Sultan sorts the whole thing out. The wife, unfortunately, did she get killed? I can't remember. Somebody must remember whether she got killed or not. Anyway, yes, she did. She got cut in half, actually. It was a rather gruesome death. The slave got killed by the Sultan. The wife, after she had ended her magic on her husband through tricks made by the Sultan, had got killed. And in the end, the young prince was freed and went back to the Sultan's palace. Took them a year to get there, because obviously when in the first instance, magic got the Sultan there very fast. Now there is no magic anymore, so it's taken him a year to get back to his sultanate, and the young prince becomes the heir apparent to the Sultan's throne, and the story ends happily ever after. And that was where Scheherazade had left her story with her own king that night, to keep him enraptured about what was coming next. She said to him, "O my master, on my head and on my eyes, be thy command Bismillah." So she sprang to her feet full of joy and gladness, ran down the tarn, and took a little of its water in the palm of her hand. And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And then we start now with the 9th night. She said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the young woman, the sorceress, took in hand some of the tarn water, and spake over it words not to be understood, the fishes lifted their head and stood up on the instant." Oh, I think I just told you some of the story too fast. I do apologise. I forgot where we were. "Like men, the spell on the people of the city having been removed." And these 4 fish, by the way, that had a spell cast on them, were actually the 4 religions, Christianity, Judaism, the Muslim faith, so Islam, and the third one began with M, and I can't remember, it's Magan or something like that. So those are what the 4 fish represented, the 4 magic fish. And then the four hills became islands as they were Willown. Then the young woman, that wicked sorceress, returned to the king, and still thinking he was the negro, said to him, "O my love, stretch forth thy honoured hand, that I may assist thee to rise. Nearer to me," quoth the king, in a faint and feigned tone. She came close to his embrace, and when he took up the sword lying hid by his side, and smote her across the breast, so that the point showed gleaming behind her back, then he smote her a second time, and cut her in twain, and cast her to the ground in two halves. After which he fared forth and found the young man, now freed from the spell, awaiting him, and gave him joy of his happy release, while the prince kissed his hand with an abundant thanks. Quoth the king, "Wilt thou abide in this city, or go with me to my capital?" Quoth the youth, "O king of the age, wouldst thou not want journey in between thee and thy city?" 2 days and a half, answered he. Whereupon said the other, "And thou be sleeping, O king, awake. Between thee and thy city is a year's march for a well-girt walker, and thou hadst not come hither in 2 days and a half, save that the city was under enchantment. And I, O king, will never part from thee, no, not even for the twinkling of an eye." And the king rejoiced at his words, and said, "Thanks be to Allah, who hath bestowed thee upon me. From this hour thou art my son, my only son, for that in all my life I have never been blessed with issue." Thereupon they embraced, and joyed with exceeding great joy. And reaching the palace, the prince, who had been spellbound, informed his lords and his grandees that he was about to visit the holy place as a pilgrim, and bade them get ready all things necessary for the occasion. The preparations lasted 10 days, after which he set out with the Sultan, whose heart burned in yearning for his city, whence he had been absent a whole 12 months. They journeyed with an escort of Marmadukes, carrying all manners of precious gifts and rarities, nor stinted they wayfaring day and night for a full year, until they approached the Sultan's capital, and sent on messengers to announce their coming. Then the Wazir and the whole army came out to meet him in joy and gladness, for they had given up all hope of ever seeing their king, and the troops kissed the ground before him and wished him joy of his safety. He entered and took seat upon his throne, and the ministers came before him, and when acquainted with all that had befallen the young prince, he congratulated them on his narrow escape. When order was restored throughout the land, the king gave largesse to many of his people, and said to the Wazir, "Here are the fishermen who brought us the fishes." So he sent for the man who had been the first cause of the city and the citizens being delivered from enchantment, and when he came into the presence, the Sultan bestowed upon him a dress of honour, and questioned him of his condition and whether he had children. The fisherman gave him to know that he had 2 daughters and a son. So the king sent for them, and taking one daughter to wife, gave the other to the young prince, and made the son his head treasurer. Furthermore, he invested his Wazir with the sultanate of the city in the Black Islands, belonging to the young prince, and dispatched with him the escort of 50 armed slaves, together with dresses of honour for all the emirs and grandees. The Wazir kissed hands and fared forth on his way, while the Sultan and the prince abode at home in all the solace and the delight of life, and the fisherman became the richest man of his age, and his daughters wives with the kings until death came to them. And yet, said Scheherazade, "O king, this is not more wondrous than the story of the porter and 3 ladies of Baghdad." Once upon a time, there was a porter in Baghdad who was a bachelor and who would remain unmarried. It came to pass on a certain day, as he stood about the street leaning idly upon his crate, behold, there stood before him an honourable woman in a mantilla of Mosul silk, broidered with gold and bordered with brocade. Her walking shoes were also purified with gold, and her hair floated in long plaits. She raised her face veil, and showing two black eyes, fringed with jetty lashes, whose glances were soft and languishing, and whose perfect beauty was ever blandishing, she accosted the porter, and said in the suavest tones and choicest language, "Take up thy crate and follow me." The porter was so dazzled he could hardly believe that he had heard her aright, but he shouldered his basket in hot haste, saying in himself, "O day of good luck, O day of Allah's grace," and walked after her till she stopped at the door of a house. There she rapped, and presently came out to her an old man, a Nazarene, to whom she gave a gold piece, receiving from him in return what she required of strained wine clear as olive oil, and she set it safely in the hamper, saying, "Lift and follow." Quoth the porter, "This by Allah is indeed an auspicious day, a day propitious for the granting of all a man wisheth." He again hoisted up the crate and followed her, till she stepped out at a fruiterer's shop and bought from him Shami apples and Osmani quinces and Omani peaches and cucumbers of Nile growth and Egyptian limes and sultani oranges and citrons, besides alpine jasmine, scented myrtle berries, Damascene nenufars, flowers of privet and chamomile, blood red anemones, violets and pomegranate bloom, eglantine and narcissus, and set the whole in the porter's crate, saying, "Up with it." So he lifted and followed her till she stopped at a butcher's booth and said, "Cut me off 10 pounds of mutton." She paid him his price, and he wrapped it in a banana leaf, whereupon she laid it in the crate and said, "Hoist, O porter." He hoisted it accordingly and followed her as she walked on till she stopped at a grocer's, where she bought dry fruits and pistachio kernels, tihama, raisins, shelled almonds, and all wanted for dessert, and said to the porter, "Lift and follow me." So he up with his hamper and after her till she stayed at the confectioner's, and she bought an earthen platter and piled it with all kinds of sweetmeats in his shop, open-work tarts and fritters scented with musk, and soap cakes and lemon loaves and melon preserves and Zainab's combs and ladies' fingers and Kazi's titbits and goodies of every description, and placed the platter in the porter's baskets. Thereupon quoth he, being a merry man, "Thou shouldst have told me. I would have brought with me a pony or a she-camel to carry all this market stuff." She smiled and gave him a little cuff on the nape, saying, "Step out and exceed not in words, for, Allah willing, thy wage will not be wanting." And then she stopped at a perfumer's and took from him 10 sorts of waters, rose-scented with musk, orange flower, water lily, willow flower, violet, and 5 others. And she also bought 2 loaves of sugar, a bottle for perfume spraying, a lump of male incense, aloe wood, ambergris, and musk, with candles of Alexandria wax, and she put the whole into the basket, saying, "Up with thy crate, and after me." He did so, and followed her until she stood before the greengrocer's, of whom she bought pickled safflower and olives in brine and in oil, with tarragon and cream cheese and hard Syrian cheese. And she stowed them away in the crate, saying to the porter, "Take up thy basket and follow me." He did so, and went after her, till she came to a fair mansion fronted by a spacious court, a tall, fine place, to which columns gave strength and grace, and at the gate thereof had 2 leaves of ebony inlaid with plate of red gold. The lady stopped at the door and, turning her face veil sideways, knocked softly with her knuckles, while the porter stood behind her, thinking of naught save her beauty and loveliness. Presently, the door swung back, and both leaves were opened, whereupon he looked to see who had opened it. And behold, it was a lady of tall figure, some 5 feet high, a model of beauty and loveliness, brilliance and symmetry, and perfect grace. Her forehead was flower white, her cheeks like the anemone, ruddy bright. Her eyes were those of the wild heifer or the gazelle, with eyebrows like the crescent moon which ends Shaban and begins Ramazan. Her mouth was the ring of Suleiman, her lips coral red, and her teeth like a line of strung pearls or a chamomile petals. Her throat recalled the antelope's, and her breasts, like 2 pomegranates of even size, stood at bay as it were. Her body rose and fell in waves below her dress like the rolls of a piece of brocade, and her navel would hold on. And an ounce of bezonin ointment. In fine, she was like her of whom the poet said, "On sun and moon of palace cast thy sight, enjoy her flower-like face, her fragrance light. Thine eyes shall never see in hair so black, beauty encase a brow so purely white. The ruddy, rosy cheek proclaims her claim, though fall her name, whose beauties we indite. As sways her gait, I smile at hips so big, and weep to see the waist bare so light." When the porter looked upon her wits, when a porter looked upon her, his wits were waylaid, and his senses were stormed, so that his crate went high to fall from his head, and he said to himself, "Never I seen in my life a day more blessed than this day." Then quoth the lady portress to the lady cateress, "Come in from the gate, and relieve this poor man of his load." So the provisioner went in, followed by the portress and the porter, and went on till they reached a spacious ground floor hall, built with admirable skill, and beautiful with all manner of colours and carvings, with upper balconies and groined arches and galleries and cupboards and recesses whose certain curtains hung before them. In the midst stood a great basin full of water surrounding a fine fountain, and at the upper end, on the raised dais, was a couch of juniper wood set with gems and pearls, with a canopy like mosquito curtains of red satin silk, looped up with pearls as big as filibuts and bigger. Thereupon sat a lady bright of blee, with brow beaming brilliancy, the dream of philosophy, whose eyes were fraught with Babel's gramarye, and her eyebrows were archeline for archery. Her breath breathed ambergris, and her perfumery and her lips were sugar to taste and carnelian to see. Her statue was straight as the letter, and her face shamed the noon sun's radiancy. And she was even as a galaxy, or a dome with golden marquetry, or a bright displayed in choicest finery, or a noble maid of Araby. Right well of her sang the bard when he said, her smile twins rows of pearls display, chamomile buds or rhymy spray, her tresses straight as night let down, and shames her light the dawn of day. The third lady, rising from the couch, stepped forward with graceful, swaying gait till she reached the middle of the saloon, when she said to the sisters, "Why stand ye here? Take it down from this poor man's head." Then the cateress went and stood before him, and the portress behind him, while the third helped them, and they lifted the load from the porter's head, and emptying it all of that was therein, set everything in its place. Lastly, they gave him 2 gold pieces, saying, "Wend thy ways, O porter." But he went not, for he stood looking at the ladies and admiring what uncommon beauty was theirs, and their pleasant manners and kindly dispositions. Never had he seen goodlier, and he gazed wistfully at that good store of wines and sweet-scented flowers and fruits and other matters. Also, he marvelled with exceeding marvel, especially to see no man in the place, and delayed his going. Whereupon quoth the eldest lady, "What aileth thee that thou goest not? Happily thy wages be too little." Whereupon her sister the cateress, she said, "Give him another dinar." But the porter answered, "By Allah, my lady, it is not for the wage. My hire is never more than 2 dirhams. But in very sooth, my heart and my soul are taken up with you and your condition. I wonder to see you single with ne'er a man about you, and not a soul to bear you company. And well you wot that the minereth toppleth, or unless it stand upon 4, and you want this same 4th, and women's pleasure without, man is short of measure, even as the poet said, seest not with want for joy 4 things all told, the harp and lute, the flute and the flageolet. And be thy accompanied with scents foretold, rose, myrtle, anemone, and violet. Nor please all 8 on 4 thou wouldst withhold, good wine, and youth, and gold, and pretty pet. You be 3, and want a 4th. Who shall a person of good sense and prudence, who shall be a person of good sense and prudence, smart-witted, one apt to keep careful counsel? His words pleased and amused them much, and they laughed at him and said, "And who is to assure us of that? We are maidens, and we fear to entrust our secret where it may not be kept. For we have read in a certain chronicle the lines of Ibn al-Sulman, Ibn al-Suman, hold fast thy secret, and to none unfold. Lost is a secret when the secret's told. And fail thy breast thy secret to conceal, how canst thou hope another's breast shall hold?" And Abu Nawaz said well on the same subject, "Who trusts a secret to another's hand, upon his brow deserveth burn of brand." Now, when the porter heard their words, he rejoined, "By your lives, I am a man of sense and a discreet, who hath read books and perused chronicles. I reveal the fair and conceal the foul, and I act as the poet adviseth. None but the good a secret keep, and good men keep it unrevealed. Is it to me a well-shut house, with keyless locks and doors ensealed? When the maidens heard his voice and its poetical application addressed to them, they said, Thou knowest that we have laid out all our monies on this place. Now, say, hast thou aught to offer us in return for entertainment? For surely we will not suffer thee to sit in our company and be our cup companion and gaze upon our faces so fair and so rare without paying a round sum. Wottest thou not the saying, sans hope of gain, love's not worth a grain? Whereto the lady portress added, If thou bring anything, thou art a something. If no thing, be off with thee, thou art a nothing. But the procuratrix interposed, saying, Nay, O my sisters, leave teasing him, for by Allah, he hath not failed us on this day, and had he been other, he never had kept patience with me. So, whatever be his shot and scot, I will take it upon myself. The porter, overjoyed, kissed the ground before her and thanked her, saying, By Allah, these monies are the first fruits this day have given me. Hearing this, they said, Sit thee down and welcome to thee. And the eldest lady added, By Allah, we may not suffer thee to join us save on one condition, and this is it, that no question be asked as to what concerneth thee not. Forwardness shall be soundly flogged. Answered the porter, Oh, I agree to this, O my lady, on my head, my eyes be it. Look ye, I am dumb, I have no tongue. Then arose the provisioneress, and tightening her girdle, set the table by the fountain, and put the flowers and sweet herbs in their jars, and strained the wine, and rang the flasks in rows, and made ready every requisite. Then sat she down, she and her sisters, placing amidst them the porter, who kept deeming himself in a dream. And she took up the wine flagon, and poured out the first cup, and drank it off, and likewise a second, and a third. After this, she filled a fourth cup, which she handed to one of her sisters, and lastly, she crowned a goblet, and passed it to the porter, saying, Drink the dear draught, drink free and fain, what healeth every grief and gain. He took the cup in his hand, and louting low, returned his best thanks, and improvised. Drain not the bowl save with a trusty friend, a man of worth whose good old blood all know, for wine like wind sucks sweetness from the sweet, and stinks when over stench is happily blow. Adding, Drain not the bowl save from dear hand like thine, the cup recalls thy gifts, thou gift of wine. After repeating this couplet, he kissed their hands and drank, and was drunk, and sat swaying from side to side, and pursued. All drinks, wherein is blood the law unclean, doth hold save one, the bloodshed of the vine. Fill, I take all my wealth, unbequeathed or won, thou fawn, a willing ransom for those eyne. Then the cateress crowned a cup and gave it to the portress, who took it from her hand and thanked her and drank. Thereupon she poured again and passed it to the eldest lady who sat on the couch, and filled yet another and handed it to the porter. He kissed the ground before them, and, after drinking, and thanking them, he again began to recite, "Here, here, by Allah, here, cups of the sweet, the dear, fill me a brimming bowl, the fount of life I spear." Then the porter stood up before the mistress of the house and said, "O lady, I am thy slave, thy Mameluke, thy white thrall, thy very bondman." And he began reciting, "A slave of slaves there standeth at thy door, lauding thy generous boons and gifts galore. Beauty may be he in a while to joy, thy charms for love, and I part never more." She said to him, "Drink, and health and happiness attend thy drink." So he took and kissed her cup and her hand and recited these lines in sing-song. Of course, he must be getting quite drunk now, right? "I gave her brave old wine that like her cheeks blushed red or flame from furnace flaring up. She bust the brim and said with many a smile, 'How durst thou deal frolics cheeks for folk to sup?' 'Drink,' said I, 'these are tears of mine whose tinct its heart-blood sighs have boiled in the cup.' She answered him in following couplets, 'And tears of blood for me, friend, thou hast shed. Suffer me sup them by thy head and eyes.' Then the lady took the cup and drank it off to her sister's health. And they ceased not drinking, the porter being in the midst of them, and dancing and laughing and reciting verses and singing ballads and ritomalos. All the time the porter was carrying on with them, kissing, toying, biting, handling, groping, fingering, whilst one thrust a dainty morsel in his mouth and another slapped him, and this cuffed his cheek and that threw sweet flowers at him, and he was in the very excuse me, I'm getting a bit excited, and he was in the very paradise of pleasure, as though he was sitting in the seventh sphere among the hours of heaven. They ceased not doing after this fashion, until the wine played tricks in their head, and worse their wits. And when the drink got the better of them, the portress stood up and doffed her clothes till she was mother naked. However, she let her hair about her body by way of shift, and throwing herself into the basin, disported herself, and dived like a duck, and swam up and down, and took water in her mouth, and spurted it all over the porter, and washed her limbs between her breasts, and inside her thighs, and all around her navel. Then she came up out of the cistern, and throwing herself on the porter's lap, said, "O my lord, O my love, what callest thou this article?" pointing to her slit. Her solution of continuity. "I call that thy cleft," quoth the porter. And she rejoined, "Wah, wah, art thou not ashamed to use such a word?" And she caught him by the collar and soundly cuffed him. Said he again, "Thy womb, thy vulva." And she struck him a second slap, crying, "Oh fie, oh fie, this is another ugly word. Is there no shame in thee?" Quoth he, "Thy coint?" And she cried, "Oh, thou art wholly destitute of modesty," and thumped him and bashed him. Then cried the porter, "Thy clitoris." Whereat the eldest lady came down upon him with yet another sorer beating and said, "No." And he said, "'Tis so." And the porter went on, calling the same commodity by sundry other names, but whatever he said, they beat him more and more, till his neck ached and swelled with the blows he had gotten. And on this wise they made him a butt and a laughing-stock. At last he turned upon them, asking, "And what do you women call this article? Where to? And at the end, I will show you this lovely picture, if I can, if it's not too dark. Where to? The damsel made answer, the basil of the bridges. Cried the porter, thank Allah for my safety, aid me, and be thou propitious, O basil of the bridges. And they passed round the cup and tossed off the bowl again, when the second lady stood up, and stripping off all her clothes, cast herself into the cistern, and did this as the first had done. Then she came out of the water, throwing her naked form on the porter's lap, pointed to her machine, and said, O light of mine eyes, do tell me, what is the name of this concern? And he replied as before, the slit. And she rejoined, hath such term no shame for thee? And cuffed him and buffeted him till the saloon rang with the blows. Then quoth she, O fie, how canst thou say this without blushing? He suggested, the basil of the bridges. But she would not have it, and said, no, and struck him and slapped him on the back of the neck. Then he began calling out all the names he knew, thy slit, thy womb, thy point, thy clitoris, and the girls kept on saying, no. So he said, I stick to the basil of the bridges. And all the ladies laughed till they fell on their backs and laid slaps on his neck and said, no, that's not its proper name. Thereupon he cried, O my sisters, what is its name? And they replied, what sayest thou to the husked sesame seed? Then the cateress donned her clothes, and then he fell again to carousing. But the porter kept moaning, oh, and oh, for his neck and shoulders, and the cup passed merrily round again and again for a full hour. After that, the eldest and handsomest lady stood up and stripped off her garments, whereupon the porter took his neck in hand and rubbed and shampooed it, saying, my neck and shoulders are on the way of Allah. Then she threw herself into the basin and swam and dived, sported and washed, and the porter looked at her naked figure as though she had been a slice of the moon, and her face with the sheen of Luna went at full, or like the dawn when it brighteneth, and he noted her noble stature and shape and glorious form, and that quivered as she went, for she was naked as the Lord made her. And then he cried, alack, alack, and began to address her, verifying in these couplets, if I liken thy shape to the bough when green, my likeness errs, and I sore mistake it, for the bough is fairest when clad the most, and thou art fairest when mother naked. When the lady heard his verses, she came up out of the basin, and seating herself upon his lap, knees pointed to her genitory, and said, O my lordling, what be the name of this? Quoth he, the basil of the bridges. But she said, quoth he, the husked sesame. Quoth she, oh, pooh, pooh. Then said he, thy womb? And she cried, fie, fie, art thou not ashamed of thyself? And cuffed him on the nape of his neck. And whatever name he gave declaring, 'tis so, she beat him and cried, no, no, till at last he said, "Oh, my sisters, what is its name?" And this is where I am going to stop, because I read quite long today. And if you want to find out what the name of the clitoris is, according to the third, I shall call her temptress, because I believe that's what these ladies are. I think it's a beautiful story today. It was very sumptuous, with lots of wonderful food and smells to delight in. And so yes, find out how the rest of this story continues tomorrow. Saman Giraud will be reading tomorrow, as you may have guessed by now. We are doing alternate evenings, and hopefully on Saturday evening I will be having a special guest with us who will also take part in the show and do something for us afterwards. I can announce, or Saman will announce what will be going on tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to me today. I really hope you enjoyed the story. It was a great pleasure reading it. I enjoyed it very much, as I enjoyed the last story as well. I hope these ladies are going to fare better than the other ladies have so far in the book. Tune in tomorrow and find out. I hope you are all very well in isolation and looking after yourselves, and are getting masks in your supermarkets or wherever you are. If you're outside of Austria and listening in, that you are keeping safe and that you are well looked after, and that life is very good to you. And by the way, the other thing we will do is under all the past stories, we're going to put which chapter it was. And if I can work out how to do that, actually load up the book until now. You can find it on the internet anyway, but I'll load up the book, the pages that we've read so far, so that you can reread the stories if you want to, or you simply tune in, find out what's going on again tomorrow. And as I said, we look very much forward to seeing you. Many salams. Have a wonderful evening, morning, lunch, night, whatever time of day it is for you. And good night. Bye-bye, everybody. I'm signing out. Bye-bye. Take care.